Alexander. How's everyone doing out there today on this Tuesday? We hope everyone is well, and we are going to discuss MH17. All right, Kungazopa just became part of the Duran community. Quick reminder, guys, you can join the Duran community. Special member benefits if you click that join button right under the video. I think it's for like $1.99, and you really help us out by joining, and we give you all kinds of different perks. Alexander, how are you doing today? How is everything in the UK and in London? And very quickly to everyone that is joining us, wherever you are in the world, we hope you are safe and healthy and everything is going well for you and your family as we see the coronavirus, COVID-19, spread throughout Europe and the US and South America and Africa and pretty much everywhere. So we hope everyone is doing well and is safe. Alexander, the Oracle of London. In London, how are things in the UK?
Well, I personally am well and safe, and so are all my friends, all my relations. I've just received earlier today news that two of my friends, who are both in their 70s, are sick and have self-quarantined, believing that they've got the coronavirus. It's not absolutely certain because our National Health Service refuses to check them or treat them or test them. So they're left guessing about what sort of condition they have, which of course, in a sense, increases their anxieties. And if you're talking about London generally, well, I mean, you know, there is a great deal of fear and worry and uncertainty, and shops have run out of many essential goods, and things are a lot quieter than they were. But life goes on, and you see people in the streets, you see people walking their dogs, and as I said, that's the way life continues. Let's hope it continues that way, and let's hope this crisis is over soon. And I join in what Alex said, that we hope that all our friends who come to us in our programs will stay well and safe, and their friends and loved ones will stay safe, and that we'll all come through this together intact.
We will. We will. Everything will work out. Everything will work out. So let's take a break from the coronavirus news cycle, Alexander. And there are a lot of big news stories. We posted a video on CrowdStrike. We got a video on Mueller coming out, Robert Mueller. We got a video on MBS coming out. And today we're going to discuss MH17, which is a huge story that no one is reporting about. The show trial taking place with MH17. And Alexander, you can remind us about the MH17 tragedy that happened in East Ukraine and take us into this trial that is now taking place many years removed from that accident, many years. But first, let's see where people are joining us from, Alexander, real quick. Let's just do a quick around the globe for about 20 seconds. We got Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Sharon from Greece, from Amsterdam. Hey guys, love from Canada, from Aleman. Let's see where else. All right, Harvadion became a member. Great, welcome Harvadion to the Duran community. Let's see where else. From Switzerland, from Toronto, Rotterdam, Santa Clara. All right, Yorkshire. Okay, great. All right, let's get rolling. Alexander, let's do a quick sum up of MH17, past, present, and where this thing is going to take us in the future.
Indeed, sir. And can I just add to what you just said? It's important to remember that because there's the coronavirus and a financial crisis underway, it doesn't mean that other things are not happening in the world. There's lots of news going on, lots of important things. And we at the Duran are committed to covering those things and giving you commentary on them. And that's why we've decided to do this program, because this is an important issue. Now, what is this issue of MH17? MH17 was a Malaysian airliner. It was flying from the Netherlands to Kuala Lumpur. It passed over eastern Ukraine in July 2014. This was at the time when there was a war underway between the East Ukrainians, the people of the Donbass, the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, against the Ukrainian government, which had recently taken power following the events in Kiev in February 2014, when the previous incumbent, democratically elected constitutional president Viktor Yanukovych was removed from power by force and a new government took over. This provoked a political crisis in Ukraine. Crimea broke away, and there was an uprising in eastern Ukraine, which the new Ukrainian government sought to suppress by force. That led to fighting in July 2014, during which the Ukrainian government, failing to close its airspace, allowed commercial airliners to fly over the war zone, and one of them, MH17, was shot down. The trial that we're going to discuss now is supposed to determine by whom, and hundreds of people were killed, of whom the majority, or at least a very large proportion, were Dutch citizens. Now, what happened then was that various Western governments, including especially and most importantly the United States government, accused Russia and the people in eastern Ukraine who were fighting against the Ukrainian government, who they called Ukrainian separatists, of shooting down MH17. And they came up with this very complicated scenario whereby the Russian military, presumably with the agreement of the Russian authorities, transferred into eastern Ukraine, into the hands of these people who were fighting the Ukrainian government, whom the Western powers call separatists. They transferred supposedly a Buk missile system, and this Buk missile system went to a place called Snezhnoye in eastern Ukraine and was launched. Nobody seems to know quite why, and it shot down MH17, leading to this tragic loss of life. And it's important to remember when discussing MH17 that this is a massive personal tragedy for the people who are involved. And anyway, on the strength of this alleged shoot down, which as I said, the US authorities and the Western governments all said, all blamed Russia for, in July 2014, various sanctions were imposed, sectoral sanctions were imposed against the Russian economy, which continue to this day. And it was this event more than any other that led to the massive downward spiral in Russian-Western relations, which has never since recovered. So that's the overall scenario. Now, what happened then was that there was supposed to be an investigation of the accident, which is supposed to happen according to the International Aviation Authority rules. That was carried out by the Dutch Safety Board. It claimed that MH17 was shot down by a Buk missile system. That's a Russian-built, or rather a Soviet-built and designed missile system. And it's important to remember that Ukraine and Russia were both, before 1991, constituent republics of the Soviet Union and shared the same armed forces. Anyway, the Dutch Safety Board said it was a Buk missile, and then alongside the Dutch Safety Board, there was this parallel investigation going on by the Joint Investigation Team, the JIT, which consists of certain Western countries. It also includes Ukraine. After 6 months after it started, Malaysia, at its insistence, was allowed to join, but this investigation was led by the Dutch, and it refused to admit Russia. So the Ukrainians are part of the Joint Investigation Team, the Russians are not, even though the Russians have consistently complained about that, saying that either they should have been included, or Ukraine, which is a possible suspect in this shoot down, should have been excluded. So this is the Joint Investigation Team. As you rightly say, it has taken 6 years to carry out an investigation. Last year, it published indictments against various individuals who were political leaders of the various breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, and it has now initiated a trial in The Hague, which is going to be the subject of our program today. So I'm sorry if I've just given this extended introduction. There's lots more that can be said about all of this, but I hope I set the scene clearly and precisely. Now, I should say also that this program is going to be largely, but not entirely, based on information that I've been provided by basically three people. One is Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire. The other is Max van der Werf. And the third person is Jana Jaroslava. Jana and Max, if I can, they will forgive me referring to them in that way, have been absolutely zealous investigators looking at all the various aspects of this case and the trial that's underway in The Hague, and have been looking at all the information that's been coming out of the joint investigation team, and they've been studying how that evidence was put together and what that evidence is. And I would stress that some of the opinions I'm going to express on this program are my own. I don't want to attribute to them theories that they have never expressed, any of those three people, but I am following very closely, at least to the extent that I understand it, the information which they gave me. And I would also add something else, which is that Jana and Max have never pointed fingers at anybody. They've never said any particular party shot down MH17. They've not said it was the Russians. They've not said it was the Ukrainians. They've not said that it was the people who the West calls and the Ukrainian government calls the East Ukrainian separatists. They have simply looked at the investigation, the evidence, how that evidence is being put together, and the trial that is now underway in The Hague. And that, by the way, is what we are going to do on this program. I'm not going to go around saying I know what the answers are and what the solutions are to this mystery. I've always been someone who, as people who follow the Duran know, care an awful lot about due process and proper investigations, and that is what concerns me about this affair. Now, I should just add two further things about the trial. The actual defendants are not physically present in the court. Most of them have refused to participate in what they consider to be a show trial and a sham. One has, in fact, appointed lawyers. This is a Dutch legal team who are representing him. That there's apparently one Russian lawyer present, and that, I suspect, was a surprise to the prosecutors. But what it means is that the prosecutors have had to share their evidence with this defense team, which I suspect they hadn't expected or wanted to do. There are 38,000 pages of evidence. That may sound like a lot, but to my knowledge, and I've been involved in legal proceedings, 38,000 pages is not a huge amount of evidence in a case of this kind. So I hope I've set up the scenario. I think we can now go ahead and discuss the various points that I'm going to talk about in this program. Now, the first thing I want
to... Alexander, before you get to the points, very, very quickly, you mentioned Jana and Max. I've actually put a link for their documentary in the description box called MH17 Call for Justice. So in the description box, you'll be able to get to that documentary. It's an excellent documentary. It's on YouTube. I suggest everyone see it. It's about 35 minutes long, 40 minutes long. So it's just a fantastic documentary. I've also put a link to another documentary from Lieutenant Colonel Prozopov, which is called MH17 in Search of Truth, which is also an excellent documentary. That's also in the description box. So for everyone watching this after we do this live stream, take a look at those documentaries. They're not long, and they put a lot of what happened with MH17 into context. And Alexander, you're about to talk about the trial that is taking place right now. So get into it.
Right. No, I said that the defendants were not physically present. The one defendant is actually represented through lawyers. The first thing to say about this trial is that apparently this talk that it may last for 5 years. Now, when I heard that, I was absolutely incredulous. And I said, can this really be true? It seems that it is. I find that amazing. I want to stress this is something that Max and Jana have not said to me. I've got that information from other sources, but it seems that it's true. So we're 6 years from the shoot down of MH17, if it was shot down, and we're going to be 5 years from any possible verdict. I mean, 11 years after the event. That seems incredible. And
is that normal for these types of trials?
No, it is not normal.
Usually, how long do these types of trials, in your experience,
I mean, 3 months, 6 months, 6 months. I'm told. I'm not going to say who told this to me. I mean, but I'm told that the assumption was that there would be no defendants and that there would be no lawyers representing any of the defendants, and that it was expected that the court would therefore proceed without any interference from any defendants at all, and would be wrapped up in a year. And instead, because somebody has come along and has instructed a team of lawyers, it's going to take 5 years, or so it is expected to do. Now, that seems to me absolutely extraordinary. And I would say, I'm going to say straightforwardly, I think that already calls into question the propriety of this kind of trial, a trial which lasts for 5 years in a case of this kind, so that we're 11 years away from the actual event is bizarre. Now, the second thing, and this I've actually understand was actually said at the trial itself. If you look at the defendants, they are, generally speaking, the political leaders, the political and military leaders of the two breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. The prosecution apparently has admitted that it is not alleged that any of these people was directly involved in shooting down MH17. I mean, I find that already extraordinary, and apparently the prosecution has already admitted, that in fact it doesn't actually know who the people were who were pressing the buttons and pushing the levers to shoot down MH17. So, we're already starting with what look like defendants who only have a tenuous connection to this event. And it's been, the charge apparently is that they were involved in some sort of conspiracy with the Russian authorities to smuggle in this missile system from Russia, and that this somehow makes them responsible for the fact that MH17 was shot down. Now, I have to say, if I've understood that rightly, that looks to me so nebulous and amorphous a charge that I'm not quite sure, and this may be a question of Dutch law, but I'm not quite sure what exact crime is being alleged here. It's been suggested to me that, the Dutch authorities treat these people collectively as terrorists, and that this somehow means that, having weapons in this way, they were involved in some sort of terrorist act. I find that very difficult to understand or accept, and I don't really understand. I don't even understand the charge. Carry on.
Can we back up a second? I'll say, I don't understand. Why are they going forward with this type of trial? They're not looking to put to trial the people that shot the plane, supposedly.
Yeah. Well, it seems
supposedly, and supposedly we kind of know who did it in their opinion.
Yeah.
In the JIT's opinion.
Yes.
How come they're not focusing on that, and why are they focusing on these guys? Is it to create the connection to the Russian government? Is that what this is all about?
I think
pin it on them, and then you can kind of move the trail to the Russian government, and then you can pin it eventually on the Kremlin. Is that where this whole thing leads to? Because I just don't understand why they're moving forward with this.
No. Well, I think partly and I'm going to say this, if you're going to hold a 5-year trial, that's partly, I think, intended to kick this thing into the long grass and not actually, to sort of bore everybody.
Smother it.
Smother it, exactly, because
Okay.
they don't want to admit that the investigation, so it seems to me, has failed to identify the actual alleged perpetrators.
Haven't
But
they
of course,
supposedly had recordings? Because I was watching
well,
documentaries and those.
we're
Okay.
going to come to that.
Okay.
But to come back to your initial question, it's also, it seems that it's also fairly clear that this is all being done in a way intended to involve the Russians, because the conspiracy that these people were engaged with, it's allegedly, was with Russia. So it's all about lumping in the Russians and focusing it on that. Now, let's come to the actual evidence. Now, of course, there's 38,000 pages of it. We haven't seen all of it. There may be all sorts of things there that we don't yet know. But some evidence has been leaked, or rather, not leaked isn't the right word, because the JIT, the Joint Investigation Team, has actually provided and published this evidence. And I'm going to come in a moment to the due process issues about that, because for me, that is already very serious. But what they've provided basically are 3 types of evidence. The first is radio intercepts. Now, these radio intercepts were all provided by the Ukrainian security service, and they allegedly show various officials, military commanders and those sorts of people in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic talking about, their plan, their plot to bring in this missile, and how they reacted to the shoot down of MH17. So there's radio intercept evidence. The second are various films and photographs, some of which I remember, by the way, from 2014. They appeared in a magazine called Paris Match, and they appear to show a Buk missile being trundling around the east Ukrainian countryside. And the third evidence is evidence of witnesses. Now, let's just take those 3 types of evidence one after the other. Now, the first evidence is the radio intercepts. Apparently, it's been admitted that by the Joint Investigation Team that the intercepts, I say apparently because I'm not absolutely certain about this, but this was my understanding, that the radio intercepts that were published by the Ukrainians on the actual day of the shoot down have been doctored, that they are contaminated and that they are not reliable. And the Joint Investigation Team is not relying on those. It is producing a vast amount of other radio intercept evidence also provided by the Ukrainians. Now, at a meeting at Conway Hall, which Jana and Max were presenting their conclusions, they had with them an expert from Malaysia, a major forensic expert, somebody who was able to look at these radio intercepts, which have been provided and which are now the basis, it seems, of the prosecution case. This expert said unequivocally that these radio intercepts are doctored also. And what he said was that some of them are amalgamations of various telephone calls or radio calls, and that they've cut and spliced and combined various calls over to give an impression that things are being said or intended, which the actual speakers were not saying and did not intend. And
Who is they? Who is they? The SBU?
The SBU, the Ukrainian Security Service. So if you believe this evidence that this person, this expert has provided, and I have no reason to doubt what he is saying, this evidence doesn't look at all convincing. Now, the second evidence is, as I said, these pictures, this film, these photographs of this book trundling around the countryside. It's very uncertain to me what the provenance of these photographs or films is. But again, there's apparently fairly good reasons for thinking that these films or pictures have been doctored. Also, that's my understanding of it. Again, I hope I'm right in saying this. Or if they were photographed, they're genuine photographs, they may not have been taken on the days alleged. And if you watch Jana and Max's film, you will find that they actually speak to one of the people who appears in one of these photographs. And of course, he's not able to confirm that he saw this book missile at all on the day that it's alleged to have been there. So that evidence also looks shaky. And then there is the third evidence, which I find the most remarkable of all in some ways. And I suspect, by the way, that it is this evidence, which is the bulk of it, which is 38,000 pages of evidence. And that is witness evidence, except it seems that many, many of these witnesses are anonymous. And the argument that
Where
was
have we
made,
heard that one before?
well, indeed, the argument that was made at the court in The Hague is that the one that, that's hearing all of this is, of course, we cannot identify these witnesses. We cannot bring them to court to give evidence there or be subjected to cross-examination because, of course, if their identities are exposed, the Russian authorities will go out and kill them. There's words to that effect. Now, that seems to me incredible. I find that absolutely bizarre. That seems to me to go completely against all logic in trials of this kind. I would remind our viewers, I'm sure they've all seen, detective films and thrillers and films about gangsters and criminals and all sorts of things, that, what happens is, somebody comes along and wants to give evidence against their criminal gang. They have to be put in protective custody until they can be safely produced to the court to give evidence. And courts do not accept witness evidence that is anonymous. That has always, until very recently, been the principle. It's been steadily undermined in the West. I think I'm right in saying that the Yugoslav tribunal, the tribunal that was looking into the alleged war crimes in Yugoslavia during the wars there, that has already accepted anonymous evidence, which is quite shocking. But this is a Dutch domestic court. It's not an international court. I find it very disturbing that anonymous evidence is apparently being produced to it. And I wonder what the Dutch judges will say about that. I hope that they will stand on the well-established legal principle and will reject it, because
do Dutch courts allow that? If
well,
anyone is
I'm not a Dutch lawyer.
In the live stream or in the comments after the video,
Absolutely.
let us know if you know this.
Absolutely.
If Dutch courts allow anonymous witnesses.
I certainly don't think they should over a case like this. I think this is completely wrong and completely unacceptable. Now, there's one other thing I get to say, which is that, of course, all of this evidence was published by the Joint Intelligence Team in the run-up to the trial. They held various press conferences in which they gave out dribs and drabs of this evidence, and they even produced a film showing the book missile trundling around eastern Ukraine. I again find that extremely disturbing. I think it's completely inappropriate, as far as I'm concerned, for investigators to publish any part of their evidence in that kind of way. And I think it is grossly prejudicial, because already it, in effect, identifies the guilty party. So, given that that is so, I think that already puts a massive question mark over the integrity of this whole legal process. Either you disclose everything in the run-up to the trial, which I don't think you should do, by the way, or you disclose nothing, which is what you ought to be doing in any investigation of this kind. So I've already seriously concerned about many fundamental aspects of this investigation. Now, before we go into other details, I just want to say that Jana and Max have been incredibly assiduous. They have been doing what the investigators have not been doing. They've been going around the Ukrainian countryside. They've been interviewing people, and they've been getting witnesses to speak to them, and they've been extremely careful at all times to make it clear that these witnesses that they have found are not anonymous, and they are local people. And if you watch their films, you will see who they are. And it's very striking that many of these witnesses contradict the official story in very important ways about, where this missile was launched from and things like that. And what a lot of them say is that there were lots of fighter aircraft, Ukrainian fighter aircraft that would have been, in the skies over eastern Ukraine at the time when MH17 was shot down. Now, it's important to stress, because this has caused massive confusion, that Max and Yana are not saying that it was those fighter planes, those Ukrainian fighter planes, that shot down MH17. What they are saying is that the presence of those fighter planes is a material fact which should have been included in the evidence, and it has not been. And that is an important fact in itself. So already we are seeing here fundamental problems with the trial and with the evidence. Now, there is a huge amount of evidence which the Russian authorities have produced, which Max and Yana have not discussed. These are about the provenance of the Buk missile, which allegedly shot down MH17, things of that kind.
The serial number, you mean?
The serial number and all those sorts of things, and radar data and those kind of things. That's not what Max and Yana have discussed. That they're not looking at the Russian evidence. They're looking at the evidence that was produced by the joint investigation team, and which forms part of the prosecution case in the trial. And I don't think I'm misrepresenting what they say. I think I heard Max say that on the basis of the evidence that has so far been released, the case against the people, the defendants, and ultimately against the Russians is very far from compelling.
Yeah, those serial numbers
that
the Russians have disclosed, the Russian military, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, show that the Buk missiles were indeed in the hands of the Ukraine military, correct?
As I understand it, what happened was that the joint investigation team provided evidence which showed photographs which actually, perhaps by accident, disclosed serial numbers that then enabled the Russian military to carry out checks. They found the factory, which they say built the Buk missile. This was in 1986, when the Soviet Union was still in existence. And they then show, and they produced a film which shows how this missile was then transferred by rail to an air defense unit based in Ukraine and stayed there, with the implication being that it is now that it then became part of the Ukrainian military, so that it would have been the Ukrainian military that shot it down. That is Russian evidence. That's not what Max and Yana were discussing. I want to make that absolutely clear.
So in the live stream from Jay Van Hogen, as far as I know, anonymous evidence is not evidence in Dutch criminal law or in Dutch civil law. Thank you very much for that comment, Alexander. The UK involvement, Bellingcat's involvement, because those audio leaks and the video, and I remember the video, which shows the Buk, I think, going down a street in Lugansk or somewhere in the Donbass.
Yes.
I think that has been proven that was doctored by looking at the billboards and the time of day and everything.
Yeah.
And that video was also doctored.
Yes.
I think it's conclusive that the audio leaks were also doctored, and they were pretty much deep audio fakes. And there was a lot of splicing and editing going on by the SBU. But the UK does have an involvement there through Bellingcat, which jumped on this story, as Bellingcat jumped on the Syria chemical weapons hoax as well. So who's Bellingcat and what's their purpose in this? And there's also reports that there were UK agents in Ukraine as well, about a week or two before the MH17 was downed as well, which is very suspicious in my mind, because I know the U.S. involvement, and we've documented it via Joe Biden, and the fact that he was pretty much running the country, and Natalie Jaresko as the finance minister, and Yatsenyuk and Victoria Nuland, and all that stuff going on in Ukraine at the time. But UK agents, what would they be doing in Ukraine?
Well, indeed. Let's start with Britain's overall involvement. There was one a person. There was as I said, there was this meeting in Conway Hall, and then there was this other person who was due to speak there, who was a Malaysian military officer, who was due to who actually went to eastern Ukraine just after MH17 was shot down, in order to collect the black boxes, which, bear in mind, belonged to Malaysia, because this was a Malaysian aircraft. And this officer was going to give his information, but he received at the last moment an order from Kuala Lumpur that he was not allowed to speak to the people who were there at Conway Hall, waiting to listen to him. But we actually know what he's going to say, because he's also discussed his involvement in the program. He says a number of very interesting things. Firstly, stories that that the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic were preventing him from collecting the black boxes and investigating the wreckage and all that, are completely untrue. They were very cooperative. It was the Ukrainian authorities who tried to prevent him going to the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. When he did go to the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, he was given the black boxes without any problem or hesitation, and they were completely intact and they were sealed. And then he came under the most gigantic pressure, as did the Malaysian authorities, to hand over those black boxes to, you guessed it, the British. And in fact, it was the British who ultimately gained possession of these black boxes, even though it seems the Malaysians have all the resources and technology necessary to check those black boxes themselves. So that was already, if you like, an important British involvement in this whole affair. The British took control and possession of the black boxes against the wishes of this Malaysian officer, and they've been an active participant in this whole affair. Well, because I
can see Netherlands, I can see Malaysia, I can see Ukraine, but why the British?
Well, and indeed, and it's important to point out that Britain is not a member of the Joint Investigation Team. So that's
even more reason to not be involved.
Even more reason not to be involved. So why? And I think that's a hugely important question, which of course we've never been given, or at least I've never seen an answer to. But it comes to the next point that you're making. Yes, there were lots of British people in eastern Ukraine and in Ukraine itself, from the government, from the British government, from the security services, because Britain was an enthusiastic supporter, and is still an enthusiastic supporter of the Maidan government that took power in Ukraine in 2014. And they were very, very strong supporters of the war that government was waging against the people who, as I said, the West calls the East Ukrainian separatists, or the Russian-backed separatists, or even sometimes I've seen them called the Russian separatists, and the Russian army, which is supposed to be there in eastern Ukraine, but possibly isn't. But the British have been extremely active in right from the beginning in supporting Ukraine in this conflict with Russia, and clearly they see Ukraine as an important, even critical ally. They obviously have very strong intelligence and security connections with Ukraine. We've discussed this in our discussions of Russiagate, perhaps even the Skripal affair, who knows? And this is simply another example. I mean, I think it looks to me that they wanted to get those black boxes in order to shield Ukraine. That's how it looks to me. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, people are entitled to disagree, but I'm entitled to express my opinion.
Have the black boxes ever been released to the public? What was
Well,
on
no,
them?
as I understand it, they have not been made generally available. I don't know who's seen them. I'm sure the Dutch Safety Board has seen them. I'm sure the Joint Intelligence Team, the Joint Investigating Team have seen them, but certainly the Russians have never had access to them. The Ukrainians have, but not the Russians. Now, the other thing you asked about Bellingcat, as we know, Bellingcat is this interesting, shall we say, entity that carries out what it calls citizens journalism and investigations, and they are amongst the major and most fervid proponents of the fact that it was the Russians who are somehow responsible for the shooting down of MH17, and they're the people who've provided all the well, a lot of the pictures that people have seen of this this Buk missile trundling around eastern Ukraine, which there are so many doubts about. All I'm going to say about Bellingcat is that, as far as I'm concerned, they're an absolute. They're not a reliable organization because they are not proper investigators. I mean, you can call them a propaganda outfit, and bear in mind they are partly funded by the Atlantic Council and organizations like that,
i.e. NATO.
By NATO, indeed. Or if you prefer, they are commentators with their opinions. But I don't see how and upon what basis they are given the authority that they are given. I mean, I've never understood this. I've never understood why people take this organization as seriously as they do.
Because the media is told to take them seriously,
well,
because
absolutely.
they're planted there very much in the same way with Syria and the chemical weapons. They did the same thing. NATO used Bellingcat because they get Bellingcat and they get the mainstream media to get Bellingcat on the shows. And it's just kind of this, circular, verification going on between, these NATO, CIA, neocon, neoliberal, globalist sources. That's all it is.
Well, indeed.
You get Bellingcat to say what's happening, and the mainstream media proves their point. Bellingcat proves the mainstream media's point, and everyone's propagandized.
Well, indeed. I mean, I said, you can call them a propaganda outfit, and describing them in that way and discussing the way in which parts of the media well, not parts, the Western media follows them would I think.
Well, they're told to, aren't they, Alexander? I mean, if you had to make a guess, they are told to put these guys on their shows, and they're going to push this narrative, i.e., in the case of MH17, that Russia did it. That was a narrative. Russia did it.
Alex, that is indisputable. I know this for a fact. I've spoken to Tariq Haddad, who was a journalist at Newsweek, who questioned the OPCW story. And he told me straightforwardly that Newsweek told him that he couldn't publish that story because Bellingcat contradicted it. So Newsweek follows the line that Bellingcat sets. Now, why would Newsweek do that?
Because it's the line of NATO.
Well, that's essentially what Tariq Haddad says. So that's not I mean I've heard it from a source, from somebody. He wasn't sacked. He resigned, I should say. He resigned from Newsweek because he felt this was a completely unacceptable position. And it seems to me it's a completely unacceptable position. Bellingcat cannot have the kind of resources and skills to carry out the kind of investigations that they claim to carry out, and claim that those investigations come up with any kind of conclusive evidence. So I don't want to discuss them anymore because, frankly, I think that they are just, if I can say frankly, a nuisance and a distraction. I think what we should do is look at the evidence, which is what Jana and Max and other people are doing, and ask ourselves fundamental questions about the propriety of the proceedings that are going on in The Hague. And as I said, we've already seen certain very serious things, serious questions about the evidence, radio intercepts which have been doctored, or at least about which there is evidence that they've been doctored, social media images about which there is evidence that they've been doctored also, and anonymous witnesses. defendants who have only a tangential connection, even as the prosecution alleges, to the actual deed itself, an admission that there is no knowledge of who the people who carried out the deed is, and a trial that's taking place 6 years after the event without the defendants present. Well, that's perhaps not the prosecutor's fault, but anyway, they're not present, and which may last 5 years. Now, that doesn't seem to me like any kind of proper process or trial. And of course, I omitted to mention in that catalogue that we have a joint investigation team in which one party, one possible suspect in this case, because we can't exclude the possibility that it was a Ukrainian missile. I mean, it can't be excluded, it seems to me, is a party, Ukraine, and another party, which is Russia, is excluded.
Everything you have said, Alexander, about MH17 could easily have been said or could be said about Russiagate, Ukrainegate, the Syria OPCW and the chemical weapons hoaxes, the Skripals, everything you've said, the anonymous sources, all this stuff that you said, the lack of due process.
Mm-hmm.
All of it it seems like it's so formula at this point.
Well, it is. It's become so, and that is, I think, that is the single most concerning thing of all.
And the country, before you expanded it, and the countries involved.
Yeah.
U.S., U.K., Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the pattern. It's the pattern now that always and continuously repeats itself. We have all these very strong, confident, these categorical allegations before any investigation is carried out of Russian responsibility. It's always Russia, by the way. I mean, it's even in Syria when it's a chemical weapon attack, the Russians are in some way involved, even if they're not the people who are alleged to have dropped the weapons, the gas canisters or whatever. It's always the Russians. It's always attributed to them. Then you have these investigations that are then set up, which are clearly intended to arrive at that conclusion, and seem to me to cherry pick evidence, most of which is extremely dubious evidence, to say the least, in order to support that conclusion. And we now have this trial, which already is looking extremely difficult and uncertain. And so it's exactly the pattern. It's the pattern with Russiagate. It's the pattern with, as I said, many of these Syrian incidents, Skripals. I'm going to say Litvinenko also. I mean, I've done a huge piece years and years ago about concerns I had about the public inquiry that happened in Britain, which came to all kinds of, I thought, extreme conclusions about the Litvinenko case. And we now see it with MH17. In every case, they start with an assertion by Western governments, note, of Russian responsibility before any investigation has taken place. And that, by definition, is going to prejudice the impartiality of any investigation. So, as you rightly say, we are in a very, very big mess. And can I just also quickly say, and this is going to be the subject of another video, which we're going to have to do very soon. It's perhaps not coincidental that in the United States, the Department of Justice has just withdrawn a claim that it brought, an indictment that it had issued against Concord. That's the company, the Russian company of Mr. Prigozhin, the Russian oligarch who was supposed to own the troll farm. He asked to see the evidence against him, and the DOJ refused to provide it.
Mueller. You're talking about
Mueller investigation. Mueller provided this, issued this indictment, and that indictment has now been dropped because there was concerns clearly about, well, it's been admitted that they don't want to disclose what evidence they have, and maybe it's because that evidence isn't very strong. Who knows?
Russiagate's falling apart, and we'll do a video on that.
We're going to do a video of it, but this is the pattern.
You're right.
What you said, it's the pattern.
So let's wrap it up, Alexander, and get to some of the super chats.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you probably the hardest question. And yeah, I was looking at the live stream, and I remember the Spanish air traffic controller as well, who kind of disappeared. That was very strange. That was a very strange incident with MH17. I remember that as well. But the question that I've always struggled with, and the user Faith Virtue says it, and I've struggled with this a lot as well. Does Russia not have radar of Ukraine fighter jets flying the day MH17 was downed? And I'm going to broaden this out a little. We know that if there's 2, maybe 3 countries that definitely know what happened on that day, it's China. You could say China, even though they're not involved, but I'm sure they have the technology there. But it's definitely Russia and definitely the United States.
Unquestionably.
They know what happened.
Yeah.
To the very second.
Right.
Why doesn't, my question is very simple.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Russia just come out with all the evidence and say, look, enough BS. This is exactly what happened. Here it is.
Yes. Right. Let's just quickly deal with this mysterious Spanish air traffic controller. It is an established and conclusive fact that no such person has ever existed. That is a strange story that circulated in the hours and days after the shootdown. We should not assume that story, there's any truth to that story. My own personal opinion is that it was circulated, it was deliberately created by some intelligence agency as a diversionary exercise. I am going to guess it was the Ukrainian intelligence agency. That's my own personal view. I'm not saying that's true. That's my opinion. But I don't think that there. One thing is certain: there is, and never was any such person. So let's put him aside and forget him, because
not the hard question.
He's a distraction. Now, undoubtedly, the US knows about it. Undoubtedly, the Russians know about it. And it's interesting that you mentioned the radar data, because, of course, one of the stories we're hearing from the US is that all the radars at that time, for some reason, had been switched off. I don't believe that. I mean, I just cannot believe that. The Russians have provided radar data. The JIT, as I understand it, have rejected it. And here is one of the most curious things. As I may not have got this completely right, because there's so much information here. But one of the interesting things is that because Jana and Max are clearly people who are very highly regarded, and because there are clearly people, I'm guessing, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing within the Dutch prosecutorial service or wherever, who must be worried about some of these things. Anyway, Jana and Max are getting leaks from within the joint investigation team. And those show some of the discussions that have been going on within the joint investigation team. And one of them, which I thought was very interesting, was concerns about the fact that they were unable to refute the Russian radar data. Or that's how I read it. I know if I'm wrong, somebody can come and correct me, but it seemed that, you know, the Russian radar data, which suggested that it could not have been a Buk missile launched from the area that it was supposed to have been launched from, that was irrefutable somehow. So there is some Russian data. The Russians did produce satellite photos of Ukrainian Buk missile systems in eastern Ukraine. Contrary to what Bellingcat says, it seems those satellite pictures have not been debunked. They are almost certainly true. That's what I understand. But it's absolutely the case that the Russians have not been very forthcoming with information, and the US has not been very forthcoming with information. And like yourself, I wonder why. I mean, the US, it has to be said, has been less forthcoming with information so far than the Russians have. And I wonder why. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why the Russians have not provided more. I don't know why the Americans have not provided more. There must be something about this story that has embarrassed both countries.
Maybe
but
it's being used for for a later time, for leverage, for
Well, well,
geopolitical
well,
leverage, negotiations?
well.
What?
One does wonder, and one does wonder whether perhaps somewhere down the line, someone somewhere, maybe in Moscow or in the Kremlin, has made a decision to hold information back because it'll be useful if it's produced later. But you know, I should say that there are rumors. I've seen rumors on the internet that amongst the 38,000 pages of evidence, there is American satellite photos of the Buk missile actually being launched from somewhere. I don't know whether that's so. I doubt it, actually. I doubt it. But so far, the Americans have not been at all forthcoming. The Russians have been more forthcoming, but they've not provided everything. And I have to say, Yana, who is Russian, made a comment at this meeting in Conway Hall about how the Russians, when it comes to information war, they are absolutely terrible at it. So, I would just pass that on to. I'm not here to say that either side, either the Russians or the West, are telling the whole truth.
What just one of the things that's always bothered me about.
It's always bothered everybody.
Yeah.
No one is telling the whole truth here. No one is. But what I can say is that this investigation and this trial, the way they've been conducted, make it impossible to rely on any finding of guilt if that's what we eventually come up with. Because there are so many due process issues that I don't really see how this case can be treated, this process can come to any safe outcomes.
I wonder if it's like the way that Russian intelligence just operates traditionally, in that if they have, all the information, it's just part of their MO to not disclose it and to hold it. I wonder if that's just part of the way the Russian intelligence, system has always functioned from Soviet times up until present day. And Putin, being part of that intelligence network, understands that no matter how difficult times are, if you have an ace, up your sleeve, you don't show that ace until, there's a time and a place to do it.
I think that is overwhelmingly the most probable explanation. I mean, I should say the Russian intelligence system is incredibly secretive. I mean, it takes secrecy to a level that is unknown anywhere else. And that is a tradition there that goes back to the Tsars. So, it would be absolutely consistent with their DNA, if you like, to keep all this information to themselves. But having taken that step, it's done them huge damage, in information terms. And, we need to acknowledge that. And I mean, it's allowed people like Bellingcat, who we were talking about before, to run riot with evidence, which I don't really see as evidence at all.
Yeah, but Russians always play a long game. So I mean, while they may have taken a hit in the 2-3 years immediately following MH17, the first 5 years following MH17, I think they understand that, going forward.
And that is also true. And that is also true. I mean, again, you have to have spent time in Russia to know this, but the Russians play a hugely long game. They're able to. I mean, it's an enormous country with vast spaces. It often uses time as its major ally. And, that may be what they're going to do, what they're doing here, that they're waiting for the right moment to disclose whatever they have. But ultimately, and I want to say this, I don't know. All I can say is that they have not been fully forthcoming, and the Americans have been not forthcoming at all.
We have the answers. So they have the answers.
They
Russia
have the
and the US
answers.
have the answers. They have the answers to this. They have the answers to Syria, the OPCW, and all that stuff that went on in Syria, to the Skripals.
Yes.
And we're getting the answers for Russiagate. We've been able to piece that one together.
Absolutely.
Well.
Absolutely. I'm going to say one important thing, which is one thing which did come up in these discussions, and which one must never overlook and forget, and which I understand many of the families of the victims have repeatedly brought up, which is that the Ukrainians failed to close their airspace, which is remarkable, actually, given that this was a war zone. Now, It seems that the Western intelligence agencies, including presumably the British, which are all active in eastern Ukraine at this time, were reporting back to their home governments that there were no Buk missiles, certainly no East Ukrainian, rebel Buk missiles in the area, and that there was therefore no danger to high flying aircraft, civilian aircraft. Doesn't prove that there weren't any missiles there. It means that the intelligence agencies were reporting that there were no rebel Buk missiles there. But it does, there is, it seems to me, indisputable evidence that the Ukrainians had Buk missile systems there. I mean, I've seen the satellite photos. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that is conclusive evidence, and I've never seen those photos convincingly debunked. And I gather there's Ukrainian television film broadcast at the time on Ukrainian state television in news broadcasts, which showed the missiles, the Buk missiles, Ukrainian Buk missiles being deployed there. So given that is so, it seems remarkable that the Ukrainians didn't close their airspace. And I understand there have been various attempts to bring civil proceedings against the Ukrainian government because of that, by some of the families of the victims, but that the Dutch authorities have consistently worked to stop them.
Incredible. Good point. All right, Alexander, let's do some super chats and wrap it up.
No.
Let's see. Let's start with Toilet Sauce, €5 super chat. From anonymous sources to anonymous witnesses, what kind of loopy land do we live in?
Well, yes, I agree. I don't think we should rely on anonymous sources. I find the whole business of anonymous sources, the New York Times has spoken to 5, current and serving intelligence officers who've asked to remain anonymous. That's incredibly manipulative. If anybody has something they want to say, they should be open about who they are. That seems to me a fundamental starting point. And newspapers are acting completely irresponsibly in publishing information like that. That's the first thing to say. And of course, it's against the law anyway, but that's another story. So anonymous sources is a terrible thing. I mean, one has the odd exception, people like Seymour Hersh, the late Robert Parry, people like that. But generally, we should be extremely careful about anonymous sources. And anonymous witnesses, I regard that as a horror. I think that's absolutely appalling and absolutely unacceptable, certainly in a case of this nature.
All right. From Kungazopa, thank you for joining. New member. Thank you, Kunga, for being a member. From Christian Delord. Bonjour from shut down Ontario, Canada, but healthy and kicking. Yes, Canada has shut down their borders and everything. Good move, I guess, from Trudeau to finally shut things down. We hope everyone is doing well and everyone is healthy in Canada. Harvard Dion, new member. Thank you for joining, Harvard Dion. Member, guys, you can just click the join and you can become a new member via YouTube. And we also have PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar as well. Different benefits to joining there, and it all helps us out, so we appreciate it. From Sparky, $2 super chat. Stretching out trial keeps focus away from the truth.
Exactly. I mean, that seems to me exactly what this is all about. I mean, it's not intended to arrive at a conclusion. It's intended to conceal it, to submerge the conclusion. I mean, in 5 years' time, there will be people who will remember this, but the families of the victims will remember this, but most people, it'll be history by then.
Yeah. Well said. From Valley S, $20 super chat. As always, thank you, Valley S. We really appreciate it.
Very much so. Thank you very much.
Very much. And from Megawatt, a new member, welcome to the Duran community, Megawatt. Thank you very much. And finally, from William Hagen, $2 super chat. Says get off. All right. Looks like that's what we will be doing. Yes, smash the like button. Everybody share the video with everybody you know, because this video on MH17 will definitely
be demonetized. even though, let me point out that we have expressed no views or theories that anybody's entitled to challenge what we say. And as I said, we're certainly not going down any wild conspiratorial rabbit holes. And yet YouTube clearly doesn't like us doing programs like this. So we rely on your support to continue to do these programs.
Yeah, YouTube doesn't like us in general. I don't know why.
No, I don't know.
Anyway, we will keep on broadcasting.
Well, actually, I do know why. But anyway, there we go. We do rely on you for your support.
All right. And what else, Alexander? We have a video on MBS, like I said, that'll go up tomorrow.
Absolutely.
From the crazy kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we should do a live stream. I don't know if we'll do it tomorrow or on Friday or on Thursday on COVID-19.
Correct.
And how everyone is dealing with it from all over the world. And we'd like to hear your stories.
Absolutely.
What's going on in your country.
Absolutely.
What's happening.
I mean, we really do want to know, because obviously it's so different from one place to another. I mean, here in Britain, two of my friends believe they've got, that they've been infected, but the NHS won't test them because there is no interest in doing so. And they are over 70 and they're in the high risk age group. So you would have thought they would be the sort of people who should be tested, and they're not being tested. So we want to compare what's happening to people in different countries and see what people's experiences are, and hear as many of your opinions on that subject as possible.
That's worrisome. You better run, says, unfortunately, history is always written by the victors.
Well, true, but I'm not completely pessimistic about this. Truth does eventually come out. You're talking about MH17. I have no doubt that we will one day know the full truth of this. How long that will be, I don't know. But there will come a day when the whole truth is known and we have a clear understanding of what exactly happened.
I think out of all the things we mentioned, Russiagate, Syria, Skripals, MH17, all that stuff, I think Russiagate and MH17, we're going to definitely know the whole truth. That's what's happening.
Absolutely. And as you rightly said, Alex, two governments, the Russian and American, definitely know. They've always known.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They know. All right. What else? Before we wrap it up, any COVID tests for the Duran? I haven't. I feel great. I don't know about you.
I feel great. No, well, interesting. I mean, I had a bit of a temperature about 10 days ago and a slight cough, but the temperature's gone.
You're fine.
Cough
you look healthy. I think you're fine.
So I am absolutely healthy and extremely well. And London, unfortunately, is closing down. I mean, it really is in a bad way here. But I myself am well, and so are all my family.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Cyprus, and Cyprus is pretty much shut down. Yeah. The only thing open are pharmacies and supermarkets. Yeah. Everything else is completely shut down. Everything.
Well, everything else, pretty much the same here too.
Yeah, and I believe they're not letting any people in unless you have Cypriot citizenship or special papers.
So, well, it's not like that here in Britain. As far as I understand, the airports are still fully open and people are still able to come. And as I said, we don't have any testing and anything of that kind. But we will discuss all of these things, no doubt, in detail.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us, and as always, please stay healthy. Be safe, and have a great evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are.
Absolutely.
Take care, everybody.
Right.